President Trump is rightfully frustrated, as are we. The Hill puts it as President Trump slamming judges after ruling Barr's administration from using Alien Enemies Act to deport gangs. And it has to do with this truth post from President Trump. Can it be so that judges aren't allowing the USA to deport criminals, including murderers, out of our country and back to where they came from? If this is so, our country, as we know it, is finished. Americans will have to get used to a very different crime-filled life. That is not what our founders had in mind. And of course, many of us who actually revere and respect the Constitution as the highest law in the land really take into heart the original intent of the amendments of the Constitution as a whole in our respect for the Constitution. And President Trump is correct. This is not what the founding fathers had in mind. President Trump lashed out at judges early Saturday after a recent court ruling barred his administration from continuing to use the 1798 Alien Enemies Act and deport alleged Venezuelan gang members. The president's criticism comes less than 2 days after U.S. District Judge Fernando Rodriguez Jr., an appointee of Trump, ruled that the AEA does not allow the commander-in-chief to quickly deport alleged Venezuelan gang members to a jail in El Salvador, extending an existing block. In his 36-page ruling, he pretty much ruled that even though we are being invaded by the nation of Venezuela via Tren de Aragua, and that Maduro is using a new form of warfare to invade our country, that the proclamation's language does not fall in within the meaning of invasion, the traditional invasion. This is why we get our asses kicked, because all of these anti-Trump people, even judges that were appointed or nominated by President Trump, side with the old way of thinking. That is why China and all these other countries have been able to one-up us in many places, because they're playing new warfare, and the old guard, the status quo here in America, is still saying things like, Tren de Aragua, that's not an invasion, because it doesn't meet the traditional, historical sense of an invasion, even though that's exactly what we're suffering through right now, an invasion. The administration has asked the Supreme Court to do away with deportation protections, also known as temporary protected status, for more than 600,000 Venezuelans, looking to lift a separate federal district judge's decision to pause the push as the litigation continues. Speaking of the Supreme Court, we know one person who is not an ally of President Trump at all, and I'm talking about far-left Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who actually received a standing ovation after attacking President Trump at a conference in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico. I'm Boricua. Puerto Rico. I'm Boricua. But my Spanish, I don't speak Spanish like a Puerto Rican, probably because I've lived and worked in Mexico and Central America, and my Puerto Rican accent is gone. That's neither here nor there. Without mentioning Trump's name, Justice Jackson condemned the president's criticism of far-left radical district court judges and said it's time to address Trump's threats and harassments against judges. Here is a Politico reporting on this conference and what Ketanji Brown Jackson, probably the lowest IQ of anyone currently sitting on the bench in the Supreme Court. As I reported a few days ago, we even have fellow leftist Sotomayor, who actually is Puerto Rican. Just thought I'd mention that. Actually told Ketanji Brown Jackson to essentially shut up during an argument at the Supreme Court in which she was not allowing the person to present their case and their points. It was annoying everybody. And Sotomayor was like, just let the guy finish. We want to hear what he has to say. Let him finish before cutting him off. Just so you know, and don't forget, Ketanji Brown Jackson couldn't even define what a woman is. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson forcefully condemned attacks by President Trump and his allies on judges who have blocked Trump administration policies, warning that the increasingly hostile rhetoric poses a dire threat to the country's political fabric. I'll talk about hyperbole. The attacks are not random. They seem designed to intimidate those of us who serve in this critical capacity. The threats and harassments are attacks on our democracy, on our system of government, and they ultimately risk undermining our Constitution and the rule of law, says a dumbass judge that knows nothing about the rule of law, even though she is a Supreme Court justice, knows very little about the Constitution, and doesn't even realize in her language that we are not a democracy. Nowhere does it say democracy, the word democracy, in our Constitution. Why? Because we are a republic. We are a constitutional republic with a Republican form of representative government. It is a form of democracy, but we are not a mob rule democracy. Though she did not mention Trump by name, Jackson said she was addressing the elephant in the room, a clear reference to the belligerent language and calls for impeachment that Trump and some of his advisors have lobbed at federal judges who rule against his agenda. Once again, this is Politico. That's why they're saying things like belligerent language and rule against his agenda. No, the ruling against President Trump's agenda, his agenda, is our agenda. Because per our constitutional Republican rules of government, the President of the United States is chosen by we the people. So President Donald Trump is our president, and therefore it is our agenda. This argument, of course, didn't apply to Joe Biden because, well, we know how and why Joe Biden was able to occupy the Oval Office over the last 4 years. Jackson urged her judicial colleagues to show raw courage to dispense justice without fear of the results. I urge you to keep going, keep doing what is right for our country, and I do believe that history will vindicate your service, the Biden appointee said. And then she was rewarded with a standing ovation from the fellow judges and lawyers in attendance. Her 18-minute tirade is the strongest public statement by any member of the Supreme Court since the Trump administration began denouncing judges who have blocked Trump's policies on immigration, firing government workers, and halting federal grants and contracts. Once again, all actions that are part of his authority and purview as the boss of the executive branch, the President of the United States. So much for the Constitution and the separation of powers. And let's not forget that Ketanji Brown Jackson isn't the first Supreme Court justice to lash out at President Trump. Last month, Supreme Court Justice Roberts defended the rogue judiciary and slammed Trump's call for impeaching judges in a rare rebuke. Of course he did, because Judge James Boasberg is a fellow member of his of a secret society of lawyers and judges in D.C. And so he had to come in and protect one of his own. If you recall, he said that Trump calling for impeachment of judges who aren't following the Constitution was not an appropriate response to disagreements concerning a judicial decision. And as far as impeachment is concerned, President Trump is talking, but he can't impeach them. It has to come from those in our legislative bodies in D.C. And of course, these are weak-ass GOP members, Republicans that don't do anything. So President Trump can talk about impeachment, but because the Republicans are weak and won't take up impeachment, these judges can continue literally breaking the Constitution, defecating on it with impunity. No one's going to stop them. Unfortunately, that is where we currently stand. Now, let me talk about the latest from Judge Beryl Howell, one of the most disgusting anti-Trump, TDS, anti-constitutional judges currently on the bench. Even though all these cases are supposed to be randomly assigned, we sure see a lot of very important things end up in the court of one Judge Beryl Howell, who continues to come to the rescue of the deep state and the Clinton machine. Maybe Judge Howell is afraid of the consequences of going against said machine. The list of murder, accidents, and other, let's just say, unfortunate events that lead to the loss of life to people who, let's just say, oppose the Clinton machine. Maybe that's what's keeping her in line, but I'm pretty sure she's a willing participant, a willing operative in doing everything to oppose President Trump and the will of the people. Judge Howell has ruled that Trump's executive order targeting law firm Perkins Coie is unconstitutional. A federal judge ruled coming into the weekend that President Trump's executive order targeting the law firm Perkins Coie is unconstitutional and permanently blocked the administration from enforcing it. In a pretty lengthy 102-page decision, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell ruled in favor of the firm and said President Trump's directive that sought to punish it sent the message that lawyers must stick to the party line or else. Using the powers of the federal government to target lawyers for their representation of clients and avowed progressive employment policies in an overt attempt to suppress and punish certain viewpoints, however, is contrary to the Constitution, which requires that the government respond to dissenting or unpopular speech or ideas with tolerance, not coercion, Howell wrote. She found that the executive order violates the First, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments to the Constitution. So those are the facts of the case. But for a more true reporting of this is essentially a corrupt Obama judge who has proven time and time again her corruption, ruling in favor of the firm, directly opposing President Trump, who previously had stripped security clearances of the employees at the DNC law firm. Let's not forget that Hillary Clinton and the DNC paid Perkins Coie more than $1 million to use Fusion GPS to do opposition research and then push a bogus PP and Trump dossier during the 2016 election. And then they use all of that fabricated nonsense as part of their Russia collusion investigation. And even though they said that President Trump was colluding with a foreign power, it was they who used a former British spy, Christopher Steele, to compile over a dozen memos alleging that Russians had blackmailed Trump and that his associates were conspiring with the Kremlin to win 2 election cycles ago. The memo was made into a big deal. It was published by BuzzFeed, who had no credibility, still has no credibility, even though the memos were absolute horse manure, totally debunked. They still published it. So Perkins Coie and Hillary Clinton were behind the hoax, and now Judge Beryl Howell is coming to their defense. She's the same one who had previously blocked part of President Trump's executive order barring employees from the DNC law firm Perkins Coie from even entering federal buildings after stripping them of their security clearances. She's the one who granted Perkins Coie's request for a temporary restraining order for part of President Trump's executive order and said the president violated the law firm's due process. And then last week, as I reported, she called DOJ lawyers 3-year-olds who were throwing tantrums. And she did the same thing. She compared President Trump's executive action against Perkins Coie and other law firms to the Red Scare. And coming into the weekend, she went off on Trump and said his actions draw from a playbook as old as Shakespeare, who penned the phrase, "The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers." And of course, this all plays into the false notion that President Trump wants to be a king. As she states in her ruling, when Shakespeare's character, a rebel leader intent on becoming king, hears this suggestion, he promptly incorporates this tactic as part of his plan to assume power. Further stating that President Trump, like in the Shakespeare play here, which is Henry VI, Part 2, Act 4, eliminating lawyers as the guardians of the rule of law removes a major impediment to the path to more power. I wonder if Beryl Howell actually wrote this opinion or if she asked ChatGPT to do it for her. Okay, folks, things aren't looking very good for the truce and for a ceasefire and peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And let me give you one guess. Who's the one holding this up? Who's the one opposing this? If you said President Zelensky, you would be correct. Point of no return. Zelensky rejects Victory Day truce, doubles down on threats to Moscow's parade packed with foreign dignitaries. Russia's Medvedev hints at nuclear retaliation. For a long time now, the Kiev regime leaders have been trying to ensnare the U.S. and NATO into their war, knowing full well that it would take this brush with Armageddon to give them a fighting chance in their losing effort. Now it sadly appears that the perfect opportunity has presented itself for Ukrainian leader Zelensky to escalate things beyond the point of no return. Vladimir Putin, as I had reported this past week, declared a ceasefire for the May Day celebrations to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the victory against Nazis in World War II. And after a few days, Zelensky finally announced that he rejected the truths and can't guarantee the safety of more than a dozen foreign dignitaries that will be present. Paul Sarin asked the very, very important question. If we imagine what kind of nuclear repercussions this act could or would have, we may be tempted to chalk it out as mere posturing or psychological warfare to try to scare some leaders off the event. But there's the catch. And here's the catch. Zelensky could just jump on a luxury train to Poland, leave Ukraine to fry behind, and then watch globalists send in foreign troops and start World War III. Maybe that is the plan all along. Speaking at a press briefing on Saturday, Zelensky reiterated his position. Quote, Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky has warned that Kiev cannot guarantee the safety of world leaders attending the May 9th celebration in Moscow. He also dismissed Russia's proposal for a Victory Day ceasefire as a theatrical production. It is impossible to build any plan for the next steps to end the war in 2 or 3 days. And so it just doesn't look very serious. It's more of a theatrical production on his part, he said, referring to Putin. The guy doesn't want peace. Literally does not want a ceasefire or anything. No one is going to help Putin play this in order to give him a soft atmosphere of escape from isolation on May 9th and to make everyone feel comfortable and safe. Those leaders, friends, or partners of Putin who will come to the Kremlin Square, we are either at war or Putin is showing that he is ready for a ceasefire. So as Zelensky is threatening assassination during the celebration, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, a voice for Russian maximalism and a man who does not mince words, came out with the inevitable nuclear retaliation threat. Zelensky is such a lightweight and should never have ever been in any sort of position like he is now, in my opinion. In the event of a real provocation on Victory Day, no one guarantees that May 10th will come in Kiev. The green unshaven a-hole said that he rejects Putin's proposal for a 3-day truce on May 9th and cannot ensure the safety of world leaders in Moscow. He called Zelensky's words about the possibility of an attack on the victory parade a verbal provocation. But man, no one guarantees that May 10th will come in Kiev. That sounds like a nuclear threat to me, folks. What are your thoughts? Put it down below. Now, I don't want to be all gloom and doom. Epoch Times this weekend has this report that Zelensky says that the Vatican meeting with President Trump was the best so far, and that he's urging those in Kiev to actually go ahead and ratify the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal as quickly as possible. Ukrainian President Zelensky said that his meeting with President Donald Trump was substantive and the most substantive the two have ever had. Speaking to reporters this weekend, Zelensky said the encounter with Trump, which took place on the sidelines of Pope Francis's funeral on April 26th, marked a shift in tone and substance between the two leaders. I believe our conversation with President Trump was the best we've had so far. It may have been the shortest, but it was the most substantive. With all due respect to our teams, I think the one-on-one format worked best. He said it's because it cut through diplomatic formalities by creating the right atmosphere for a real dialogue. He went to say the newly signed minerals deal, which grants U.S. firms preferential access to Ukraine's rare earth and strategic mineral deposits, was the first concrete outcome of the Vatican meeting and a sign of what could follow. In fact, this is the first tangible outcome of that Vatican meeting, making it truly historic. Zelensky has urged Ukrainian lawmakers to swiftly ratify the agreement, whose structure reflects truly an equal partnership that will generate economic returns for both countries while reinforcing Ukraine's sovereignty. So hopefully with this signed, and even with Zelensky's crazy rhetoric that's egging on Russia and level heads will prevail. But even though we're getting these rare earth minerals now, we will be from Ukraine, we can't stop there. We must, of course, be independent of all nations for what we need the most. So let me report to you on minerals and what President Trump has just done. Another promise made, another promise kept. Trump administration approves more critical mineral mining projects. Remember, the goal is to be completely independent of nation states, enemies, and allies alike. The White House announced the approval of more mining projects as part of President Donald Trump's campaign pledge to make America much less reliant on other countries for elements that are critical to U.S. defense and manufacturing. The Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council announced the second group of critical mineral production projects. The White House said in a press release going into the weekend, these projects represent the second wave of critical mineral initiatives granted by these different executive orders, the White House said. The bottom line is that the Trump administration is excited to grow our own domestic portfolio of critical mineral production projects with this latest tranche. And all of this comes on the heels of the deal between DC and Kiev, as I have been reporting. These elements are crucial to the production of highly sensitive U.S. military components, but the market is currently dominated by China. Another great move by President Trump to make us independent of nation states that are enemies to us. We shouldn't be beholden to anyone, not allies, and definitely not rogue crazies like Zelensky or President Xi and the Communist Party over in China. All right, folks, I love and appreciate every single one of you. There are some very vital stories I still want to cover this weekend, but I'll be traveling back to California here Sunday, so don't know if I'll have another report for you. But guess what? Hit that notification bell. And if I do have another report, you'll be notified. Either way, make sure you hit the like button before you leave. And please check out my other show at bcpextras.com and therealbcp.com. Until the next one, ciao, goodbye, much love, God bless.